2:05 p.m. in conference room 325. First up on the agenda, we have HB 1105, HD1, relating to the University of Hawaii Board of Regents Candidate Advisory Council. First up, we have the University of Hawaii Student Caucus in support.
Aloha, good afternoon, Chair and Vice Chair and members of the Committee on Judiciary and Hawaiian Affairs. Thank you so much for the opportunity to testify in support of HB 1105. My name is Mara Stevens-Chu, and I am a graduate student organization delegate for UH Student Caucus, which is an organization chartered by the Board of Regents and represents over 50,000 students throughout the UH system. UH Caucus officially supports HB 1105. We believe in its purpose of providing a diverse and representative membership to the Candidate Advisory Council, which will result in diverse and representative candidates being brought to the governor for appointment to the Board of Regents. We really are enthusiastic about the opportunity to appoint a member of the Candidate Advisory Council, and we also support extending this opportunity to the UH Alumni Association, the Office of Hawaiian Affairs, and the All-Campus Faculty Senate Chair Council. Again, if you would like to hear more details about why Student Caucus supports this bill, please refer to my written testimony. And thank you again for this opportunity to testify in support of HB 1105. Mahalo.
Okay, thank you. Next up, we have Academic Labor United in support.
Aloha, Chair Nakashima, Vice Chair Matayoshi, and members of the Committee on Judiciary and Hawaiian Affairs. My name is Alex Miller. I'm the chair of Academic Labor United. Academic Labor United believes this bill will increase consensus and participation of worker, student, and community stakeholders in UH governance and reduce conflict between university governors and administration and the university community, which we've seen happen a lot in the last several years. So we strongly support HB 1105 and urge you to pass this bill. We will stand on the rest of our submitted written testimony, and mahalo for the opportunity to testify today.
Okay, thank you. Next up, we have University of Hawaii Association of Emeritus Regents with comments. Oh, not present. Okay. Next up, oh, actually, you know what? Those are the only testifiers we have for this measure that indicated they were going to show up for the hearing. Members, any questions? Okay, hearing none, we are moving on to HB 174 relating to eyewitness identifications. First up, we have Office of the Public Defender in opposition.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, committee members, Chair, Vice Chair. This is Ben Lowenthal, the Public Defender.
Ben, you're muted if you're there.
How's that? Can you hear me?
We can. You're coming in a little broken up, though.
Okay. Good afternoon. Ben Lowenthal on behalf of the Office of the Public Defender. Our office opposes House Bill 174 and will stand on the testimony that has been submitted. And I look forward to any questions that the committee members may have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next up, we have HPD in support.
Good afternoon, Vice Chair, Chair, and members of the committee. I'm Randall Platt,
Stand on the testimony that has been submitted.
Sorry, can everyone mute their mics if they're not talking?
Captain with the Honolulu Police Department. We stand on our written testimony in support of House Bill 174, and I'll be available for any questions from the committee members afterwards. Thank you. Vice Chair, were you able to hear? I'm sorry, I can't hear you. You're mic'd. You're muted.
Aloha, can you hear me? Hi, Jennifer Brown. Thank you for allowing me to submit testimony in opposition to this bill. We stand on our written testimony. I would like to just highlight a few things in that written testimony for the chairs. As we note in our documentation, the Hawaii Innocence Project, we represent people that have been wrongfully convicted. And one of the most common causes of wrongful conviction is eyewitness misidentification. It is 78% of all wrongful convictions that have been later exonerated by DNA testing. I also want to highlight, though we do mention it later down in our written testimony, I would like to highlight that one of the things that I think is most problematic with the amendments to this bill is in section 2A1, where they strike the requirement that there needs to be a complete description of the possible perpetrator before there can be kind of any suspects. And I think this it just doesn't make a lot of logical sense. How could you do an identification if the victim does not make a statement about what the person looked like, how high, how tall? All of these factors are incredibly important. And it's also one thing to note as well is with eyewitness testimony is that you need to get a statement from the eyewitness as soon as possible. It needs to be preserved just like any other kind of evidence, whether that be DNA or fingerprints. It needs to be treated just like that because memory is incredibly infallible. And eyewitnesses, when the crime first occurs, they're on alert. They can most accurately describe the suspect. And so that's why you need to memorialize that description as soon as and as complete as possible. And I'm happy to take any questions you may have.
Ben Lowen, the question is for Ben Lowenthal. My understanding is that this law has been in effect for less than a year, and I wanted to get your thoughts about how it's working.
Yes, the law has been in for less than a year. And I can say that prior to this law coming into effect, each county, whether it be Big Island, Kauai, or Maui, or Honolulu, had slightly different procedures. And so the intent of the law was to create a best practices standard for police officers throughout the state. Quite frankly, it's still a little early to really see the full effect that this law has, because we only address these on a case-by-case basis. And on top of that, you have many cases which the officers will attempt to gather eyewitness identification evidence. And then there's the additional questions to whether that particular evidence is so important to a case that the defense counsel, whether a public defender or anyone else presenting the accused, feels it's necessary to challenge the way it was gathered. So to answer your question, how is it going? It's a little too early to tell. And that is, again, a reason why we are opposing any changes that would make it simply optional, because it would be a disincentive not only for police to strictly comply to the best practices. It would also be a disincentive for counsel for the accused to challenge it if there's this idea that it's not going to make a difference. So it really is a little early to see how it's working.
Do you think having like another year of seeing how this law is playing out would help to make any changes in the future?
I think the more time, the better. And when it comes to gathering evidence and evidence techniques, it is a rather challenging process because, as I mentioned, you have to have the investigation part. You have to have a lot of factors that go into play. There needs to be a charge. There then needs to be a case itself, and it has to be challenged in a court. And that does take time. I would think a year is better, and but I know from experience in our office, and and that is, again, testifying from Maui, from a neighbor island office, the investigative techniques here, 801K, has really come up only a handful of times. So the more time we have this, because it would be better, we can understand where some of the problems are and some of the strengths are. So police to strictly comply to the best practice earliest, but this bill is a little bit also be a disincentive for preference. So it really is a little.
Thank you.
I'm sure to say that
Yeah,
it's not working. Thank you.
All right, hearing none, let's move on to HB 175, relating to sex trafficking. First up, we only have one person on the agenda to testify, the Office of the Public Defender in opposition.
Thank you. This is William Bento of the Public Defender's Office. I'm standing in for Lee Hayakawa, who had submitted our written testimony. We will stand on our written testimony and be available for any questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Members, any questions? If not, moving on to HB 150, relating to felonies. First up, we have the Office of the Public Defender in opposition.
Thank you. William Bento again, Deputy Public Defender. We are in opposition to this bill for the reasons stated in our written testimony. I just want to highlight 2 points. The term delay as it's used is vague and ambiguous, and it does invite litigation. We think it is unnecessary to be part of the bill, as well as using the state of mind of recklessly. This will cause a need for litigation in this on these types of cases, and so we would oppose it as well. We are available for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we have the City and County of Honolulu Department of Transportation Services in support.
Thank you, Vice Chair. This is Joy Kaliwi from the Honolulu Department of Transportation Services. Thank you for hearing the bill. We are in strong support and we're available for questions.
Thank you. And last up, we have HPD in support. Mr. Kunishima, are you there? We do see HPD here to testify. We'll give them a couple more seconds and then we'll move on. All right, members, any questions about HB 150? Yep, Chair.
Office of Transportation Services?
Yes.
Sorry, I'll call you back. Yeah, I'll call you back.
The bill, the law initially imagines a assault on a person, a driver, in the transit, and assigns through that a Class C felony. In this case, there is no person, so to speak, being harmed. So how do you justify the Class C felony for that?
So we contemplated two scenarios in which that would justify the Class C felony. One is if, not so much as someone holding the door for a kupuna or something that examples we've seen in other testimonies on this bill, but more so if someone, jams the door or drops something, between the gate and the vehicle, the rail vehicle, and there's a malfunction and the train can't move, and there's damage to the vehicle, the rail, the station, and it stops the transit vehicle from moving. That was one thing. Or the other is something along those lines, and then passengers are harmed. Like there's a sharp and quick sudden stop, and maybe standing passengers fall over or are otherwise injured. There is still a potential for bodily harm caused to someone in that type of situation.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Members, any questions? I've got one. I'm just going to follow up on Chair's line of questioning and your response from Department of Transportation Services. If they do cause a sudden stop or injury negligently or otherwise to other passengers, isn't there another statute that they can be prosecuted under? We don't necessarily need to make this one a Class C felony?
I mean, yes, to a certain extent, depending on what the action is. I'm sure we could contemplate a series of them. For example, if someone were to say start a fire and that causes a delay or some other, damage that causes harm to a passenger or something, sure, there are laws already for that. I think we just had in mind that there might be other situations that, may not fall clearly into a category with a severe enough response. And I think in the interest of public safety.
I'm struggling to find a scenario wherein no other law would apply for a harsher penalty, and just this one would apply to justify a Class C felony in this situation. If you have one, please let us know.
Quite frankly, top of mind, other than what I've already described, we don't have an example.
Okay, thank you. All right, that's all the questions we have. Moving on to HB 458 relating to driver's license. We have one testifier in the agenda, Department of Transportation in support.
Good afternoon, Chair, Vice Chair, and members. Lynn Araki-Regan from the State Department of Transportation. We stand on our written testimony in support with amendments. For the reasons that we explained in our testimony, we recommend that the bill be amended to remove the requirement of having less than 2 moving traffic violation convictions for this age group, 70 to 79. Thank you.
All right, thank you. That's all the testifiers we have. Members, any questions? Seeing none, moving on to HB 1194 relating to the statewide traffic code. We have one testifier in the agenda, Department of Transportation in opposition.
Good afternoon, Chair, Vice Chair, members. Lynn Araki-Regan from the State Department of Transportation. Yes, we stand by our written testimony in opposition. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Members, any questions? Seeing none, moving on to HB 1010 relating to boating reports. We have one testifier, DLNR, in support.
Thank you, Todd Tashima for DLNR. We stand on our testimony in strong support.
Okay, thank you. Any questions, members?
I have a question here.
Yep, Representative
For
Nakamura.
DLNR, Todd, I wanted to just ask you, how do you address the concern of medical privacy issues in those reports?
I'm not the expert on this measure, but as I understand it, the reports are only kept between government agencies, so they are not ever made public. And that was a reason that we're asking for the reports to be unredacted, so that the information that's input is the most accurate and comprehensive as possible.
So if there is a medical privacy issue, how do you shouldn't that be redacted so that the county complies with HIPAA?
I believe so, but I would have to ask the person who worked with us on this bill.
Okay, thank you.
I can get back to you.
Okay, thank you. Members, any other questions? If not, moving on to our last bill on the agenda, HB 1253 HD2 relating to employment practices. First up, we have the Chamber of Commerce of Hawaii in opposition.
Aloha, Chair Nakashima, Vice Chair Matayoshi, and members of the committee. Sherry Minor here with the Chamber of Commerce. We'll stand on our written testimony and available for any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we have SHRM Hawaii in opposition.
Hi, Chair, Vice Chair Myung. Hi, Chair, Vice Chair Myung on behalf of the Society for Human Resource Management in opposition to this measure. We believe there are legitimate customer-driven uses for the benefit of employers, employees, and the customer. For instance, employers have been using devices, technologies such as GPS to augment and drive business efficiency. For the employer, I think there are other examples such as predicting travel times, identifying routes, and being able to fulfill duties, especially in the service and trades market. Given that there are some unknowns to the depth and reach of the apps and the uses of the GPS, we do ask for a deferral on this measure. I'll be happy to answer any questions the committee may have. Thank you.
Thank you. Last up, we have Retail Merchants of Hawaii in opposition. Right, not present. That's all the testifiers we have today. Members, any questions on HB 1253 HD2? Representative Ward.
My apologies, Chair. I just got my COVID shot, so I'm a bit late, but I wanted to ask Myung from the real estate, Chamber of Commerce, a new identity. Myung, does this also give the employee the opportunity to say, yeah, I don't mind if you do it? In other words, does this bill allow somebody who, in their own recognizance, allows this to happen? Question mark.
The way I read it, right now, even if the employee consents, it could be interpreted to prohibit the use of the app on their personal devices. We do provide some language, explicit language as part of our amendments for the committee's consideration, especially in cases where consent is given or where the device is employer provided.
So you're saying they can't opt in, period, cannot opt in?
That is our interpretation.
And are there any employment situations where this would almost be mandatory? Like, look, I got to know where you are in case you fall down dead or whatever, or that's just a rare occasion? In other words, from all of your members, do you have any of those that depend upon GPSing where their employees are?
Representative, for this bill, I am representing the Society for Human Resource Management. To the extent that I can understand some of the businesses that actually use these tracking apps, so to speak, it is primarily in the trades industry. You know, if you're in Pro City, you finish the job, the employer would send out and disseminate messages to the user or the employee saying, there's a job opening in Pearl Harbor. Can you fulfill this? They could either be in lunch or they could be elsewhere, whether or not they could fulfill it, or it would scroll down to the next employee that could be best fit, whether they're nearest, they're available, or they're currently busy. But that is where my understanding is some of the employer and employee relationship comes in, especially when it comes to the GPS. But if I can go a little bit further, there's also time cards. You know, employees and employers use applications for time cards as an alternative to coming into office and punching in.
Good point. Thank you, Myung. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Members, any other questions? right, seeing none, we will recess for decision making. Recess.
For the Judiciary and Hawaiian Affairs hearing today, it was previously announced that decision making will be held next week, Tuesday, following our Tuesday agenda next week. So decision making will be at the end of the agenda, March 2nd, next week, Tuesday. So we are adjourned.